You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
J.T. Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Ford,
Corey Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mott,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Charlene Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Jefferson Parker.
Thanks for tuning in to Author Stories today. We've got a fantastic show lined up for you. Before we get into that, I'd like to tell you about some sponsors today. Crystal Pico Watanabe at Pico's House. The Pico's House website now has a new look. She's got a team of 8 people who help provide services to fiction authors. She has a full slate of services that now include beta reading. She's got 4 beta readers now. So if you're looking for beta reading services, she can definitely take on your project. Manuscript critique, developmental editing, line editing, copy editing, and proofreading. Authors can also inquire about putting their books in her Book Lovers Box, which is a monthly digital subscription box with a different theme each month. It's free to authors for a limited time. Be sure to check out Crystal and her whole team at Pico's House. That's PIKKOSHOUSE.com. Thanks, Crystal, for sponsoring the show. While cape and spandex movies are breaking box office records, comic book commentator and influencer Ed Gosney doesn't want us to forget the roots of these marvelous wonders. His blog, Cool Comics in My Collection at edgosney.com, covers the gamut of 4-color entertainment, from contemporary comic books to comics made for kids to bargain bin gold to classics that will transport you back in time. Comic books are a perfect blend of art and story, and Cool Comics captures the essence of what these funny books mean to us in a personal way. And make sure to join the Cool Comics in My Collection Facebook group, where members can interact, show off their prized comics, and have opportunities to win. You guessed it, Cool Comics. Published weekly, Cool Comics in My Collection aims to bring you a smile and reminds us why comic books are fun. Be sure to visit edgosney.com today. Speaking of superheroes and comics, my friend Patricia Gilliam has a fantastic series called The Heroes of Corvus. It begins with Book 1, a flight between a second-generation superhero named Red Bolt and a villain for hire named Icarus goes terribly wrong, resulting in the drowning deaths of 3 innocent civilians and orphaning a 6-year-old boy. Racked with guilt, Red Bolt visits Cameron Wilson at the hospital every night and won't leave the boy's side until he falls asleep. Befriended by a night shift nurse, the man in costume begins to disclose what really happened after the fight and why he feels the deaths of Cameron's parents and sister fall on his actions. A superhero didn't survive that night, and Cameron and the rest of the city aren't out of danger. This is such a phenomenal story. She has released up to part 4 now, and I cannot wait for part 5 to come out. If you're looking for a great adventure read that's on the cutting edge of what is in today's entertainment, The Heroes of Corvus is the series for you by Patricia Gilliam. Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to go to hankgarner.com to subscribe to the show. We're on just about every platform you can imagine. Now stay tuned for our show. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm super excited to have T. Jefferson Parker back on the show with us. He was on last year. Today, we're talking about The Last Good Guy, and this is a phenomenal thriller, the 3rd installment of the Roland Ford novel series. Jeff, I love this character. I love what you're doing with him. The new book is fantastic. How's your year been since we talked last year?
It's been great. Everything's good. And I really appreciate your words. I'm so glad that Roland is resonating with you as a reader, and you're liking the stories, because I know you read a lot, and it's a crowded field. I'm glad that I got your attention. Thanks for the good words.
It's so fantastic, and our listeners just heard an audiobook clip from The Last Good Guy. I hope you guys enjoyed it. That's just a taste of what you can expect from this audiobook presentation, which the audiobooks are phenomenally done. Not only is it a great reading experience, but the audio is really captivating as well. Jeff, we always start each show with the question about your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller, and you told us last year this great story of that teacher that had the box of paperbacks, and you finding Catch-22 in there, and it was so funny because you said I didn't know that there could ever be a book that topped Shag, the Last of the Plains Buffaloes, but Catch-22 did it for you. And then from there all the way through to Laguna Beach. At looking back now on the writing career that you've had and tracing back those steps and those memories, does writing still have that same magical excitement when you start a new project where the slate is clean, the characters are all fresh and new, and the possibilities are endless?
Yes. It feels the same to me. It's a really exciting time, and it's really a great pleasure to be doing what you want to do and something that you're good at. And it's also kind of it feels like you're pushing the canoe away from the shore, and you're going down the river, and you don't really know what's around the next bend. And so it's an exciting time. And I always am jittery and nervous when I start a book, and I think it's kind of like stage fright. That never really goes away. It's a good feeling.
It is a good feeling. We talked about that first novel that you wrote and writing it 5 times, and each time that you would do it, you would see your influence. A writer that you were mimicking is not really the right word, but you were definitely wearing your influence on your sleeve until you got to the point that when you wrote it, it came out as a Jeff Parker novel. As you develop that voice and you become solidly yourself, do you still go back to some of those influences and kind of go back to the well and still study the masters?
I do, Hank. I still go back to the well and I study the masters who were influencing me 30 years ago, and I not only go back to the well, but I add to it. In the 30 years since, I wrote that first book. I've added to the list, and one of the nice things about getting older as a writer, getting a few books under your belt, is solidifying that voice that you have. You don't have to fight so hard to hear yourself think, and it's good. And now I'm far down the river, and 25 books into my journey, and one of the things I think that I've gotten better at is inhabiting that voice. And in this case, it's the character of Roland Ford who tells the story. So I'm inhabiting Roland as Roland tells the story, and it's nice to be able to blot my heroes out until I end the workday, and then I can go open a book by Thomas McGuane and go, "Yep, that's why I became a writer."
Love it, love it. You've come up with some really great protagonists over the years, and people that really drive the stories and characters that we care about. What makes a protagonist likable by readers without making them perfect? Because your characters are not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but that's one reason that we love them. We can connect with them. They feel like one of us. Are there any things that you look for when a character comes to you?
Yeah, there is. And I thought a lot about Roland before I put the pen to the paper on him, because I knew I was going to be writing a series. And I wanted to get that main character, the storyteller, right. And so I spent a lot of time thinking about him. And I think that, some of the things that I look to in a character, and I think that my readers do, is I think a moral solidity is really good. You never really doubt that Roland's heart is in the right place. He's not unnecessarily motivated by money or fame or any of the things that can be done that can be corrupting. He's kind of pure in the sense that he can take the cases that he wants. I think it's really important too for me as a reader, and I think for my readers to believe the storyteller. We hear a lot about the unreliable narrator these days, and I think that all sorts of licenses have been taken in that sort of entertaining mode that don't really hold up to scrutiny for me as a reader. When I read this character who is suffering from these diseases and shoveling down the pills or the drugs or the alcohol, and nothing that he or she really tells me can be relied upon, I don't like that. So Roland is a straight shooter. I mean, he likes his bourbon, and he's got his foibles and what have you, but he's dependable, and I like that. He's got a good, crisp, clear voice, and he tells the truth, and I think that readers are liking that of him because he's a good guy. I mean, the title is kind of about Roland.
Right. And I love that when I got this book, when our UPS driver dropped it off a few weeks ago, I saw it and I kind of laughed to myself and I was like, well, that's Roland. He's in a sea of, like you said, unreliable narrators. It's a good feeling to know that there's still some protagonists out there that are going to do the right thing, or at least, the way they see it, and you don't doubt their motivations, and I love that. I think that's a great, refreshing thing. Not everything has to be so dark and jaded.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well said. I agree.
Roland, even though we said all that, Roland is still, his motivations come from a place of hurt and longing in his life. He's lost someone, therefore he specializes in missing persons. He wants to help other people not go through the things that he's gone through. When you first thought up Roland, what was it that kind of put that character together for you? How did you come up with his backstory and find the thing that was going to motivate him?
Yeah, good. That's a great observation and a good question, and it goes to the very heart of Roland, that loss, and to be honest with you, I went through that loss. I lived that. I lost my wife when I was quite young. We were both young, and that leaves its own history and legacy in you, no matter how many years ago it may have been. And so for me to write Roland from a viewpoint of longing and wished for attainment of someone he knows he'll never see again, that was easy. And I think that really it's universal too for all of us, and I think that's why readers respond to him, because if you reach a certain age, if you're lucky enough to reach a certain age, you're going to go through a loss like that too. So it's not just Roland or select few who lose. We all do, and I think that Roland's awareness of that rings true to people.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, Jeff. As writers, we are, we really want to entertain people. We want them to have a good time while they have our book in their hand, and we want them to feel like they got their money's worth. And, that's a great feeling of satisfaction that you have been able to do that for someone. But sometimes what gets overlooked is the writer's own journey through a story. And, when you're dealing with subjects like this, it's a great way to kind of be a catharsis for us through these characters. How has your creative life helped you in your personal life?
Another good question. They're closely wed. As you would imagine. My stories and my life are in some ways closely interlinked. With regard to what we were just talking about, for sure. And so I guess every writer kind of finally is stuck with his own history and his own biography and his or her imagination. Those are kind of the two big things that we have to pull on, And so I feel like being a writer and writing in this genre is something that is that I'm well suited for, and I feel comfortable doing it, and I don't mind plumbing my own history, narrow as it is compared to a character like Roland. I mean, I didn't fight in Fallujah, and I've never been a boxer, and I don't, I've never been in law enforcement, and I'm not a PI, but I can bring a little something from the inside to Roland, and he can be my actor on this stage, if you will. And so the real, Jeff Parker gets gets good play in these novels, and I get to use myself as much as I can, and then I can leapfrog from me to Roland quickly, and get the reader with a character who's much more interesting than I am.
Do you ever have readers that assume that a part of a story or a character or a character's motivation must be all about you, and you're thinking, no, that was just an entertaining thing I came up with?
Yeah, all the time, Hank. Yeah, all the time. I mean, from first book. Oh, you must have been in law enforcement, because my first book was about a policeman. I go, no, never was. And yeah, you're right. You sometimes, often, the biggest, most interesting parts that make up a novel are nothing to do with you and nothing to do with your biography at all. It's that beautiful imagination kicking in, and your imagination giving you something to shout what it's going through.
Another thing that really stands out about your books, Jeff, is they are very West Coast stories. Most of your books are. What is it? I know you're a West Coast native, a California native specifically, but what is it about the West Coast that makes such a great backdrop for a story like this?
Well, great variety for sure. Physically, it's great to have oceans, deserts and hills all close together. I think truly that you can create a story set anywhere, and it can be a great story. So I feel lucky to be writing about Southern California, because I live here, and I've always gotten a real charge out of wherever I live, whatever little city it might be, Laguna Beach or Newport Beach or Tustin or now Fallbrook in San Diego. I get a real kick out of writing about where I am, and I feel vested here. I was born here. I'm probably gonna die here. I've been married here. I've raised my children here, and so I feel that California is mine, or this little portion of California is mine to tend like a garden. And I like to fuck around and try to get it right, make it grow.
Love it. I love it. One thing I really love about your books is that you have the ability to take something that is on our collective minds, it's kind of part of our collective consciousness, and walk us through a scenario where we might see justice in something, or at least help us to face some things that all of us are thinking about. Swift Vengeance, we dealt with some political turmoil, and the FBI is involved, and there's a lot of uncertainty with things going on in the country, and that book really got us in that space. And the new book, The Last Good Guy, we deal with some equally strong things going on. And I'm thinking about the last few weeks in the news where we've seen the stories of Jeffrey Epstein, and there's some some stuff going on in the background with human trafficking that might have been a part of that, and different things like that cause us all to kind of worry and watch out for our loved ones. And does this stuff really happen? And sometimes there are people that we think we can trust, and there's really odd stuff going on in the background that we don't see. And some of those themes play into this book. Can you tell me how this story began to evolve for you?
Sure. Yeah, I think that that comment you made at the beginning about things cropping up in this book and other books that kind of reflect what we're going through here in our exact time and place. I'm glad to hear that, because I think that one of my responsibilities as a fiction writer is, yes, it's fiction, and it's certainly to entertain, highest on the list, but it's also, I feel, maybe because of my journalism days, I feel obligated to try to give a fairly accurate picture or snapshot of what the time that I'm living in and writing about. So I pay attention to the news. I read the papers and I watch the news, and I interview people around me, and I try to feel what's going on, because that is important. I think it's really important, and I think that when you get all these threads, such as human trafficking, such as sexual abuse of minors, such as white supremacy, all these things are running rampant in The Last Good Guy. And I think when you take all those subjects, if you will, you can then you don't rip from the headlines. You take those headlines and you weave them. You weave them into the fabric on which the story is painted, and that is how you get readers to see the human face behind the topic. What is a sex trafficker? Well, let's see. Let's take a look at him. What is a white supremacist? What do they think? How do they dress? Well, let's see. Here's one right here. And I think that's important to do. And I would I hope that 30 years from now, if I'm lucky enough to have someone pick up The Last Good Guy and want to read it, I hope that he or she will get a really clear, specific idea of what it was like to be Roland Ford in this space, in this time, in 2019. And I think I owe it to my readers to bring as much truth to the table as I can.
That's a great way to explain it. When you start thinking of Roland Ford, when you first created him, did you have any idea of the kinds of adventures that you would send him on?
Not really. Not really. I keep a physical clip file, newspapers, magazines, and anything I print off the internet. I just throw into these big bins. And when it comes time to write my next book, I always go through the most recent bin and see what it is that has interested me during the course of the year that I was working on something else, And you never know what it is. You just kind of throw it into the bin, then forget about it, and until that time. And then I go through and I see what's touched me because I've learned to trust myself as a writer enough and to trust my readers enough to know that, or I'm pretty sure I know that if it's something that I'm interested in and can write well, it's something that my readers are going to be interested in also. So I kind of trust that, we're all in this together kind of viewpoint, and so it helps to be able to nudge your imagination once a year when you start a new book with all these things. And so when I sat down to write this book, I think Charlottesville had just happened, and there was much about the Me Too, the beginnings of the Me Too movement really catching fire at that time, and those are things that just burn so hotly for so long that you almost have to put them in a book. You know what I mean? It's like you can't avoid it. Yeah.
Well, what's interesting to me, Jeff, and like you mentioned earlier, kind of all of these events and these societal things were erupting. So in the book, we've got, first, Roland is hired by a woman whose sister's missing, and as he starts digging through this and through the case, we've got American Nazis, we've got skinheads, we've got a celebrity evangelist, all of these things that you expertly weave together. They're all connected, and this thread of conspiracy running through the thing. How do you start looking for the narrative thread that gets you from? Because if you look at the end from the beginning, you're like, well, there's no way that you'll get there. These are too far apart, too crazy. There are no things that link these things. And then as you go through the book, we see link after link after link, and we wind up getting to a place we never imagined in the beginning. So as the writer, how do you imagine those steps that get you through there?
Yeah. You know what I do is I build those links one page at a time. They're not there at the beginning. And you're right. If you look at where Roland ends up, where this story ends up, and then look back to the way it begins with Penelope coming in to hire him to find her little sister, you just go exactly what you just said. You just go, there's no way you can get there. And as a writer, I think the same thing. So I'm hatching the story, and I've got the Penelope scene written, and I kind of know where I want to go because these are the topics, like we talked about, that I want to be in here. This is the fabric, but I don't see the connections, and I don't see how it's going to work. And so you build those connections one at a time, and I'll tell you, when I come to the last, say, 200 pages of the manuscript. My manuscript is, say, 450 to 500 pages. I come to page 300, say, it's kind of the beginning of the end, and I get nervous, and I lose sleep, and I worry, and I fret about not being able to build those final bridges that will tie all of these very disparate things, as you said, together into a believable, dramatically satisfying story. And it's that those last couple hundred pages. Sometimes I don't know what's going to happen until the very last paragraph, and because I'm building those connections the whole time, and they don't come easy. And that's the as you know that's kind of the story writer's bread and butter. You have to entertain through logical bridges between disparate things, characters and situations, and that's where we work our hardest, I think.
I'm glad you brought up the Me Too movement, because we're part of the story we're dealing with this young woman who's missing, and was she is she doing things against her will? And you kind of play with maybe the idea of Stockholm syndrome a little bit. What happens to someone and they want to be there, or at least they think they do? That's an interesting thing to play with.
It is, and when you arrange that sort of notion in a novel and a story involving a 14-year-old girl, it's incendiary at that point. It's just like you're watching Roland senses that this girl's really close to him, and he knows by a third of the way through the book that she's surrounded by some very dangerous people, some of whom practically do him in, and so he correctly senses that she is in great peril, and you as a reader and I as a writer you can't not feel for Daly at that point, because you realize that no matter how precocious and how much of a wiseacre and how bright and how kind of sneaky and how resilient she is, she's nothing compared to these people who are surrounding her. And you're asking yourself, just like Roland is, what do they want with her? What are they doing with this girl? What possible value could she have to them? And there's a good answer to that. But you gotta live through a lot of peril to get to it.
Right. One thing I love about Roland in all of the Roland Ford books is that he's kind of like this Batman figure who's out doing this work on his own, and he's not the respected law enforcement officer that we see in a lot of some great protagonists out there that are detectives or police investigators. That is not Roland. And a lot of times they would rather him not be involved in sticking his nose and kind of mucking up the procedures and things like that. How much fun is it to have a character whose motivations are true, but is not respected necessarily by the people that are honestly trying to do their job as well?
Yeah, good question. I totally agree, and it's a blast. I love being on the side of the underdog. The reason I wanted to write a PI in the first place, a series, was because I like the underdog. I like the idea of the lone individual, working against the world, because the world is often so organized. There's the bureaucracies and the government and the departments and the police and the unions and the politics and everything that people identify themselves through. And Roland is just kind of stands alone, and I like that. I like that a lot in him, and I think that one man against the world is it's romantic, it's fun, and I think it's fun, so I've enjoyed writing him.
Are there more adventures for Roland?
Yeah, Hank, I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep going until they give me the hook. I'm liking the series, and I'm working on. I'm towards the end of the next book now. I'm 80% done with it, and it's coming along really well. And it's another Roland Ford adventure, and I hope that there will be more.
When you really get comfortable in a series after 2 or 3 books where you have a lot of things established, that the character is firmly within himself and readers are comfortable with him, does it get easier to start the next book because you have so much groundwork already laid?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't get any easier. I'll tell you why. Because the groundwork that you're correct. You have laid the groundwork and it's sitting there. But nobody reads for groundwork. All they read for is that moment on the page when things are crackling. And the story's pulling them through. So the hardest work that we do as writers, as entertainers, is to make that page crackle and those chapters go by. And no amount of groundwork really can do that for you. You know, you're going to dive out of that nest at some point, and all you're going to have is your wings, and you're going to have to fly.
In science fiction and fantasy, we might refer to that as world building, and you can get away with that in the first book, but nobody wants to hear about the vegetation in the second or third book. They want someone to take a ring to a mountain eventually.
I believe it. Yeah, well said.
Jeff, I love talking with you. The new book, The Last Good Guy, is out available everywhere now in hardcover, audiobook, Kindle edition. I encourage folks to go pick up whichever format they love the most. You will not be disappointed with this book. If people are just learning about you, Jeff, and want to dig into all that you do, is there a place they can find you online?
Yeah, I got a good website, tjeffersonparker.com. There's more about me than anyone needs to know.
We'll put a link to it in the show notes, as well as a link to the book. Jeff, thank you so much for taking time to come back on the show.
Thank you, Hank. Total pleasure.
Thanks for tuning in to the Author Stories podcast. Be sure to subscribe at hankgarner.com or on your favorite podcasting app. Now stay tuned for an audiobook excerpt from Richard Gleaves, the Jason Crane series.
They reverently slipped Jason's giant-size X-Men #1 from its mylar protector, drinking in the sweet aroma of browning paper and three-color process that signals only the best and rarest and most wonderful of collectibles. On one page, Professor X raised his fingers to his temples and rallied his X-Men, his psychic commands radiating from his bald head like waves off hot asphalt. "I have psychic powers," Owen blurted. "I want Wolverine's claws." Jason was turning a page. "Snicked. Or, hey, get this. Lightsabers poking out the backs of my hands. Or even, no, I'm totally serious. I have psychic powers." "No, you don't." "I do." Jason laid the comic on the bedspread. He sighed. Owen could be such a spaz sometimes. "Okay," he said indulgently. "What number am I thinking of?" "Stop, it doesn't work that way. What I can do is called a psychic reading, off an object, like getting impressions. When the doorbell rings, if I put my hand on the knob, as soon as I do, I know who's there." "It's called looking through the peephole, moron." "Shut up! And when I touch the phone, I know who's calling." "I'm sure, Mr. Bullshit from Bullshit Mountain. Like my sister or my grandmother, I just know it's them." "There's no such thing as psychics." "Okay, you try." "Don't be stupid. Are you chicken?" "Fine." "Okay." He snatched up a brown paper bag, spotted with grease, and dumped a few stale French fries into the trash can. "I'll put an object in this bag, and you try to guess what it is. Turn your back." Jason did, and heard a rustling behind his head. "Okay, you can look now." Owen produced the bag. It was rounded with some object now. "Don't touch yet, just think. Try to imagine what's inside." "Your lunch?" Jason sneered, but he closed his eyes and tried to imagine. He could hear Owen's breathing. Jason's nose itched. His brain grew bored with nothing to look at, and fragments of images swam in and out of his imagination. "Strawberry," he blurted. Owen reached into the bag, producing a white bowl. Jason had eaten Frosted Flakes from it about 3 days ago. A few stuck to it, like little beige fish scales. "See? I lose." "No, look here." Owen pointed. A design went around the sides of the bowl. A long string of vines and painted fruit. With strawberries. "That's," Jason began, but didn't know how to end the sentence. "It's cool. See? What did I tell you? Do it again." Jason closed his eyes. An image like daisies and sun and yellow, he blurted after 3 seconds. "Oh my God, open your eyes." Owen held a bright yellow highlighter pen. "I hadn't even put it in the bag." And so they went, for 30 minutes or more. A staple remover, a toy soldier, a sweat sock, a pencil. Jason never said precisely what was in the bag, but it was always close or related. He'd imagine a cockpit, and Owen would produce a game controller. He'd say plate, and the object would be a CD. He made right angles with his pointer fingers, shrugging, only to have Owen pull out Eliza's knitting needles. His friend became more and more enthusiastic, but Jason became a little scared. "You have a real gift," Owen said. "You're brilliant." Owen babbled for a long time about astral projection and ESP, how Jason was picking up signals from Owen's own psychic powers, which had obviously been doing the broadcasting. Owen left that night full of plans and experiments, vindicated in his beliefs. Jason sat on the bed after Owen left, thinking hard. He had no explanation for what he'd done, but he knew he hadn't faked it. He couldn't believe, but he couldn't deny either.